tonight in what is, I'll deal with that later. In what is either our penultimate event or antepenultimate event or somewhere along the line for this season for the MFA Creative Writing Series. Next week, in this same spot, we have the last year's Sparks Prize winner, Austin Bowlers. She'll be coming all the way from Balmer, Maryland, to read from her book and sing a song or something. I'm not sure. I say that because she has a band, but not just random. Yeah, but that'll be a great event. You should come, please. It's going to be fantastic. In addition to that, April 28th, which is a week from Friday, in McKenna Hall, we have the MFA graduation reading. It's at 7 o'clock. Come to that. You'll hear even more fantastic literary creations, poetry, prose, fiction, nonfiction. It's going to be a cornucopia. Please come. It'll be great. And then, as well, I should mention, May 5th, the undergraduate honors concentration thesis reading. I'm not sure when or where that's going to be, but more information will follow. That also will be a cornucopia and some magnificent work from our undergrad. So all that's coming up as we round into the end of the season, the end of the semester. It's been a fantastic year. But tonight, for me, in some ways, is inevitably going to be the highlight. What I remember best from the application, this was my first time ever doing graduate admissions, was the vernacular precision of the language, the unflinching intensity of the vision, and the breathtaking mix of genres and tones, new craft, but self-aware, at once playful and deadly serious, that make me think now about one of his workshop teachers at St. Joseph's University, a struggling short story writer named Carmen Machado, but seemed then, and frankly still do seem, as exciting and gritty and lightning fresh as anything I could ever think of having read. One particular story about a military raid on a house inhabited by monstrous bug creatures, or at least I think they were bug creatures, Surin, lashed and lingered with indelible force, an austere sourness that tasted a lot like mild memories of Baghdad as a soldier there. The applicant was a writer. That was clear. There was no question. And I was struck by his unwillingness to varnish or instrumentalize or redeem the horrible things we do to each other. This wasn't a trauma narrative where art promises something on the other side of suffering. It was just suffering. Life, care, art, imagination, and violence all mixed up together. The concrete purity of our fundamental impurity, like Samuel Beckett grew up playing Pokemon. I was impressed as well that this Iraq War veteran had grown up poor, graduated, did his military service, graduated from community college, then finished a BA at our university, then got a master's in English at St. Joseph's University, and now was applying for an MFA. At any point along the line, he could have stopped fucking with shit and just made his peace with the world, but he didn't. He kept on writing. He kept struggling to see what happened, what had happened, and account for it, to remake it without betraying its ineluctable and mind-bending complexity and strangeness, owning it by submitting to it, wrestling with language and reality on the page. He wrote, writing subverted the paradigm of my youth back when everything was an unknown. I wrote myself into existence, eventually joining world knowledge outside my immediate community. Stories told with enough care and intent can find their way into places where people like the kid I was live. Raised black and poor on the margins of society, the stories I write create the narratives I wish I had, wish we'd had. Writing has been the greatest tool at my disposal for shaping the world of possibility. It is the most difficult thing I've ever done and continues to be So Val Sayers sent him an email, and we crossed our fingers, hoping he would come out west for the measly stipend we offered. And to our great good luck, he did. Joseph was in the first graduate prose workshop I ever taught, and he was my first advisee. And all I can say is that I'm fortunate and honored I got to work with him, and I hope I didn't say anything too stupid. I could see in the early versions of Sync and his other work those same qualities I saw in his writing sample, and what's more, a merging of material, talent, will, and courage that frankly seemed beyond my neophyte skills as a mentor and teacher to advise. I mostly tried to not get in his way. Joseph made an enormous impact while he was here, distinguishing himself in seminar and workshop, getting published, organizing a very successful series of readings on the west side out near what is now the Civil Rights Heritage Center. He carried himself like a professional and managed somehow to combine restless ambition with down-to-earth chill in a way I admire and envy. In fact, I'm pretty sure I learned way more from Joseph than he ever learned from me. I'm very pleased we're able to welcome him back to Notre Dame tonight to celebrate the beginning of what I'm sure will be a remarkable career. With his debut memoir, Sync, which has not only gotten rave reviews in such tiny little Outback magazine, newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, but which has also been called by Kizzy Lemon brilliant and brilliantly different, called by book lists a crucial, incomparable act of creation and undefeated imagination, and that struggling short story writer I mentioned earlier, Carmen Maria Machado, called a singular memoir, all blood and nerve and near unbearable beauty, a brilliant and fucking fearless beauty. As Hilary Plum wrote, books like this remind us why we need books. Sync dreams a world beyond this one, shows us how to live there. Joseph Earl Thomas is a writer from Frankford, Pennsylvania, whose work has appeared or is forthcoming in Virginia Quarterly Review, N+1, Gulf Coast The Offing, and the Kenyon Review. He is an MFA in prose from the University of Notre Dame, and is a doctoral candidate in English at the University of Pennsylvania, at least last time I checked. An excerpt from Sync won the 2020 Chautauqua Janus Prize, and he's received fellowships from Fulbright, VONA, Tin House, and Billy and Bread Loaf, and is currently still the Ainsfield Wolf Fellow at the Cleveland State University Poetry Center. He's writing a novel, God Bless You, Otis Spunkmeyer, and a collection of stories, Leviathan Beach, among other oddities. He's also an associate faculty member at the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, as well as director of programs at Blue Stoop, a literary hub for Philly writers. Please join me in welcoming back Joseph Earl Thomas.
Thank you so much, Roy, for that embarrassing intro. It was good. You should think about writing criticism or something like that. It might be a strong suit for you. Thanks, y'all, for coming. It really means a lot to come back and see a bunch of faces, some familiar, some new. And sorry if I didn't get a chance to talk to folks beforehand, but I'll be hanging around. The reading part, I guess, is kind of simple and straightforward, so I suppose I should say something about the book by way of description. I read the audio book too, so I feel like now I've read it so many times that it's imprinted in my brain. So I was thinking about trying to, first and foremost, avoid certain sets of tropes about coming of age narratives, about hero narratives, about ideas about innocence, ways of reading and writing that reinscribe one's own innocence and allow everyone else to be the bad guy, etc. Think of any story and you've kind of seen these things pop up over and over again, especially when it comes to kind of popular literary fiction in the 21st century too. And part of doing that, part of my import in doing that was to strip away or take away all of the kind of intellectual certitudes that one develops when they are going to college or when they graduate from elite college institutions, let's say, and to do my best to remain in the perspective of a child. And so those kind of unknown things was super important. How do you describe things that you don't know about? How do you make sense of the world when there is no one to make sense of the world for you? And all these kind of questions. So kind of prioritizing that sense rather than the sense of oh, in the kind of neoliberal academic sense, oh, I went to college, I know the words for this, and I will use the words rather than think about changing material conditions or doing the kind of interpersonal work required for changing oneself and subsequently changing the world. So that was probably my kind of biggest thing that I was thinking about while writing this book, and maybe that's a good description of ways to kind of make sense of it. So I'll read from a couple different sections. Formally, the book is written in what I've been told are vignettes. And it was going to read from a couple different sections of the book. They're really short, none of them are kind of hyper long, but it spans from the age of about 8 to 13, all in the same, and they all take place in the same neighborhood and circle around the same set of questions, basically. But I'll start from the beginning, which doesn't need very much of a preamble. The only other thing I'll say is that there are scenes or moments that repeat themselves, whether they are holidays, changes in seasons, or events. And one of the rules I have for writing this book was to avoid the kind of trauma narrative thing, was to say if something didn't happen more than once or over and over again, I would not write about it, and I would leave that kind of thing out. So there is a thing I'm trying to do, playing with repetition, in the book as well. And one of those sections is on summer. So there's several sections titled Some Summers over and over again. But I'll start from the beginning. Of all the protagonists in this story, both real and imagined, just Joey, the boy, owned an easy bake oven. Owned it the way his grandfather Pop-Pop owned sound, like the sound of Joey's name sliding out of smoke-black lips. Joy, he said, Joy, come here. Joey was timid, to put it nicely. And the oven was purchased with the help of Capital One for his little sister Mika anyway. Joey had convinced Mika that she wanted one, and therefore, at 7, he received a gift that, through Pop-Pop's eyes, sat scandalous in the lap of his little black man in training. But Joey used it to make cheesecake, red velvet cupcakes, blackened salmon, fried chicken, and Chilean sea bass with dirty rice. The oven itself was tiny and pink, sitting on a fold-out dinner tray, flimsy and flower pattern, purchased from the Dollar General just 3 blocks away. And beneath the oven, Joey kept a black notebook. No one ever checked under there. Knowing he would make mistakes, he wrote only in pencil and yet always struggled to come back and revise. And he drew. He drew stories of lonely sea creatures, moving pictures with tiny speech bubbles sprouting from their mouths like in comic books. Some of them had rotten teeth and smelled bad. They were very long and green like giant snakes and constantly angry. One such creature had a hood like a cobra because Joey had watched Steve Irwin play with one on the Crocodile Hunter and thought it would make a good pet. Watching the emotive white man in khaki from Australia made Joey wonder about different kinds of danger, about how some forms of fear were cool and quick and entertaining and others were not. He imagined himself far away like his sea creatures. Joey's sea creatures would say things like, "Grr, I'm gonna eat you," to humans rocking through waves on wooden boats. Then, without warning, the creatures would smash the poor human's vessel into pieces. On the page, wood splintered and brown oil pastel shards through a deep blue sea of unknowing. The sailors aboard all drowned or woke up sopping wet on tiny islands with just a single palm tree. Joey had questions about why, if granted only one tree, it should always be a species without fruit. But this was ultimately fine, as artistically it felt good. Stranded, the survivors would ask a scuttling crab, why? Why did this happen? Scuttle was among Joey's favorite words. A survivor might, post-scuttling around, stand there in a yellow raincoat weeping under acidic droplets falling from an ever-darkening sky, shaded by Joey's godlike thumbs on the side of a sharp pencil. Starving, the survivor would watch sea creatures gorge themselves on the ocean's bounty, a contradiction to the brackish water Joey had seen in the Schuylkill, if ever there was one. A sea monster would drag an orca from the water, sometimes a baby, and slam its body brain first on the rocky shore over and over again. The blood was gratuitous, thick and red marker to glisten wet, and made the page feel so soggy and smell so good till it dried up and warped in brittle position. Upon seeing the bloody orca smash into those rocks, a survivor might ask the sea creature why he did it. Why slam them around like that? Are they not dead enough? In the front of the same book, Joey wrote names in dark red lines, tracing over them several times each, first, middle, and last, no initials. He'd worked himself into a fury taking these names in his own head. Overly simple dialogue, strange and unnecessary questions with no real answers, like those forced upon a child in real life. Let's say, why would you hold your wrists like that? Joey wanted these names of these people to die. Or He thought, if people are going to die inevitably, young or old, or in pain or otherwise, these people should jump the line. Adults will find this cruel, but not as cruel as Joey found them. And he could never do the killing himself because, well, he was a coward, which never curtailed his devotion to such death in theory. He did not consider himself a supervillain. He would toe a careful line somewhere between the kind of man that his mother, Keisha, might be afraid of and the kind that could protect her. If he ever, past 7, might be something more than both at the same time. There's, this is the first couple pages of the first chapter, and there's no chapter titles or whatever, except for a few of them have them. Some of them are kind of like metatextual, like ruminations on the creation of the book or thinking about the world more broadly. And other ones, like I said, have to do with changes in seasons or really kind of potent memories that repeat themselves. And this one is one of these more kind of like metatextual ones that are thinking about making the book more broadly, and it's just titled Interlude. Things aren't exactly looking up for our heroes, folks. The army men, the rats, the cats, the snake, the dog, the boy. What will he do? What will the boy do with them? Will he dispatch his foes with pop-out ceiling tile gun? Will he develop gumption and introspection to such an extent that he might become an entrepreneur of the self, extricating his own body from the tyrannical unfairness of antisocial life? Will he articulate a nuanced critique of structural injustices centering on the violence of cis-white heteropatriarchy and publish said study through a professional press, therefore saving not only himself but the world from such dangers? Will he simply grow up, come of age, and forget all about it in order to pen a more insightful story about the many nuances of Black joy, despite his own subjective experience, overcoming individuality in the service of lifting every voice to sing? Or will he simply die, having succeeded in a dying world where success almost always means someone else is dying? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Z. There's a kind of like shonen anime episodicness to a lot of the chapters in the text that kind of end and begin again in those ways, right? Like in one minute the world's ending or whatever, and in the other minute all the characters are in a restaurant and you're like, why are they eating in this restaurant? How long have they worked here? Weren't they just fighting a couple episodes ago? Like that kind of thing. Some summers Tia and Joey went on adventures. They listened to Linkin Park, Chevelle, and Slipknot riding down 2 steep hills on dyno trick bikes with pegs on the front and back. They stopped at basketball courts listening to Beanie Man and Sean Paul, played 2-on-2 with older boys who were always trying to fuck Tia, and stole, maybe for the last time one summer, the last time they might be mistaken for children, snacks and toys from Kmart. All through Frankford and Mayfair and the greater Northeast, they dug up dirt. They played knock knock zoom zoom where white folks owned houses and trimmed hedges, and whenever the knocking and zooming wasn't quick enough, answered the door with shotguns for those pesky kids. Perhaps too relevant in this past couple weeks. Everybody was escalating. It made Joey and Tia laugh. They could hit harder, run faster, lust more deeply, but never again for each other. They jumped wantonly from 2nd and 3rd story balconies, playing tag just to show off. It was easy, their arms flailing before hitting the ground and rolling. They were unstoppable in the summer, uncatchable. Pop-Up stayed home boiling blue crabs and malt liquor and hot sauce, growing orbs of red seasoning that came in little plastic baggies and enough garlic to melt every single one of the Lost Boys. The old man played caps out front with neighborhood kids, and all of a sudden it was safe for Joey to play too. Was he getting too big, too unfuckwittable, or was Pop-Up getting too old, too tired? Together, they loaded ragu and Snapple lids with Play-Doh, sliding them across the concrete Thunderdome in the middle of the street, rainbow chalk marking the limits of wins and losses, cursing for fun. Fuck out of here, Cuddy, you think you're good now? Or, damn, Cuddy, you let your grandson bust your ass like that? Oh, I taught that little nigga, he learned that from me. After an L, Pop-Up might check on the crabs, Joey's mouth just watering all the time like a Lion King hyena. A live crab might pop up in the street, mouth all foamy and clamping onto a bottle cap, the whole neighborhood laughing at the crab's struggle to be somebody. I bet you can't even beat this crab, somebody said. Nigga, you look like this crab, Joey said. People laughed. Joey and Tia took off again, to pet shops, further ones than birds, this time deeper down Frankford Ave, on corners where the magic shop used to be, outside Frankford Hospital where they once adjusted Joey's broken pinky finger. They left their bikes outside to stare at bearded dragons and hamsters. What is the real difference between a guinea pig and a hamster? And if they eat the same thing, doesn't that make them the same basic kind of animal? Can they live in the same cage together, or is it bad to want them to live in a cage at all? They were showing signs of aging. At the new pet shop between Bridge and Pratt, Joey got on his bike, got stolen while he was inside snuggling brown and white gerbils. He came out yelling a performance for Tia, "Fuck out of here, bitch, niggas better run." Glad the thieves had already gone so there would be no fighting. He rode on Tia's back pegs and sometimes Tia rode on his. If it was still warm by September, they cut school. Joey waited outside while Tia visited boys and older boys in houses under the L, peeking through the windows and listening through the door, growing hard and jealous at the sounds their bodies made against each other. At night, they climbed railroad tracks, hog spit on rocks, and pelted cars with boulders. Unbearable adrenaline. Windshields cracked, shattered, and splashed under their whole body throes. It set Joey on fire. Cars crashed into light poles and corner stores, erupting into flame, causing alarm and chaos and joy. That was a good shot, Tia might say. And Joey would grab another rock faster, competing with Tia, who grabbed 3, another windshield smashed. "You fucked that one up," Joey said. He imagined the startled driver struck out of the comfort of his AC as the car twisted off the road. He could not stop throwing and being happy. Someone yelled from down below. The kids ran. Little black lightning bolts. "Race you home," Joey said. And Tia was the only one who could match his speed. People said what they wanted about Joey, but he could run. He ran from everything. Tia never said why she was running, or what she was running from, or why she was living with her dad, or where her mom was, but she ran just as hard. Some summers, Tia and Joey traced the sticky bottom of the L from Frankford to 69th Street on bikes, rollerblades, New Balances, or brown and silver tokens, scraping wads of gum off their bodies and burning up like horny animals darting out of a flaming zoo. Joey scraped his knee. Tia got a scar. There was no telling what they might find out in West Philly or Upper Darby, other people's neighborhoods, other kids' sanctuaries or hellscapes, a boyfriend here, a girlfriend there, a stranger far too old for either of them, who had air conditioning and soft hands and cable TV. They had confidence with no direction. Bad, sad, and horrifying were subjective states of excitement, sometimes fear, but mostly hype. Who they were across the city was anyone's guess. Tia thought it would be a good idea to light a car on fire, but Joey was too scared. Joey thought it would be a good idea to kiss Tia, but she was far past being into that. They snuck into Orleans 8 to watch Scary Movie, X-Men, and The Cell up at Roosevelt Mall, the soles of their sneakers squishing all the way to the front seats like nothing was happening. They scuffled with other kids in the parking lot, throwing rocks and bottles, but never quite hitting each other. Joey wondered where they might end up if they kept going, past the Northeast and Holmesburg suburbs and prison, if they could just keep feeling good, if they never stopped moving. He pulled out a map. "Boy, where the hell did you even get that?" Tia said. "Don't worry about it," Joey said. And he pointed to a nondescript section of the map as if he knew where they were going. "Here," he said, "we should go up here." "All right, whatever," Tia said. And they took off again, running in every direction and growing up too fast and too slow to focus on any single thing at once. And this is the last one I'll read. It's another kind of some summers part, and this is like towards the end of the book as well. Some summers feel like they'll never end. And when things are going well, even exceedingly well, let's say somebody's sister is trying to do it with you and you want to do it for her, but y'all both kind of scared and you change your minds and sneak into the closed pool in the Northeast and make out all night with your clothes on, and she says she loves you, but you know she doesn't really mean it, and still you don't know, maybe she's not lying. Even then, on those nights, you can't help but think that something is going to go really wrong. Even when it doesn't. Possibility exceeds reality. But it's still warm and you have that. School is out. Some summers you'll change shape, and in the following years, relatives who used to fuck you up will say, "Oh, he done got so big now," and reach up and try to pat you on the head, and you'll slap their fucking hands down and stare in awe at their confusion. Embarrassment slips away. Some summers you'll sneak in and out of grown women's houses, and nary a lover will catch you. You'll go out so far on your bike that you can't find the L no more, and it won't even matter what time you get back, because you got a key now. You'll stay up all night on the game, and in the morning, before anybody wakes up, you'll be gone and out of the door to do it again. Thanks, Sean. Stop there. I'm hoping that, for this is the part that's actually interesting, right? Not necessarily reading. We can talk about things. I mean, you don't have to have actually read the book, right? Trust me, I get it. It took me a very long time to read any book that's not by like Namali Sapel in the first week that it comes out or something. But yeah, I mean, I hope we can spend some time chatting. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some time for Q&A.
Okay.
I can ask a question while you formulate. Actually, it'll go from what you just read. I'm glad you read that part, because there's a shift right at the end of the book from there's a third person to second person shift from the talking about joy to the you address.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also there's a shift in Joey's relationship to violence. And I'm wondering if you just talk about, I guess there's two questions in one. It's sort of maybe the role violence plays in the book, but then also how you made sort of some of those decisions about how to end it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, so I feel like I'm always writing about violence and people get really mad and annoyed. I'm like, I don't know how you could live in the world, or particularly in a country like this, and not ever write about violence. But then I answer my own question, is because you could like stay at the Four Seasons and pretend that like shit isn't fucked up. You could walk inside the gate and you don't have to worry about what's outside the gate, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that I didn't want to be kind of like phenomenal about violence, right? This is like, in a kind of like critical sense, like Saidiya Hartman writes about this the best, I think, in Scenes of Subjection, right? The argument that if the only thing you can say about violence is the most phenomenal of the things, right? The beatings, the whippings, and you just show the blood every time, that actually starts to be kind of gratuitous. And a lot of people have said this about like the way that we share police violence on YouTube, et cetera, right? And but it's also true that kind of violence is everywhere. So I kind of go back and forth on how much to explicate particular scenes, and how much to make clear that there is a situation in which everybody is either performing or performing violence, or violence is being performed on them in some capacity. And then I think with switching from third to second, so the violence thing is related to that too, right? One of the ways that I was thinking when I first started this book, I'm like, when do you, if you're like a little boy in the section of Philadelphia that I grew up, when do you start to be like a person? When do people start to like respect you? If you can't fight, right? Fighting has a lot to, like violence itself has a lot to do with it. If you're like a little boy in a lot of situations, especially if you're, or when you learn how to fight, that's when people start calling you by your name. When you exceed athletically, when you learn to dominate other people. And I think there's a lot of questions about like, I don't know, it's kind of like the boring liberal thing about like, this is like toxic masculinity. This is without really working through how you describe the thing that you're describing. So the thing that I'm trying to describe is like, as if you are coming into being as a subject and you are like a boy or you're interpolated as male, one of the things that you're expected to do, especially in a situation where people don't have a lot of power otherwise, is to perform violence. Sometimes that is particularly sometimes it's sexual violence against women, and other times it's like physical violence against weaker, smaller boys, to show that you are not a weaker. So there's a scene in this, right, where the first time I get into a fight, it's like my sister comes in the house and there's this boy who's been messing with her, and like I'm charged with like beating him up or whatever. I've never been in a fight before, can't really fight. Luckily, like he doesn't even hit me back, right? He just like cries and runs away. And then like the reflection on that is like, oh, why do I feel so bad about doing this thing? It's because I'm like 9 years old and I'm being brought into a situation that I was trying to avoid. But it's also because this person has been trained that he needs to dominate my sister, and my mother and grandmother are like, you need to beat this boy up so that that doesn't happen, et cetera, kind of circular kind of relationship. So that's kind of how I was thinking about violence, and it's related to this becoming a subject, right? So I'm trying to be like, how do you become a self, become like a person who can be like, I do this, I want this, I feel this, even when no one really treats you that way. And I think the more, it's kind of fucked up to say, if you are a little boy in the situation that I was, what you notice is that the more violent you are, the closer you get to being a self-possessed subject. And that's what I was trying to do. So it's like third person, getting closer and closer regards to interiority, into second person, which I think is a thing where I'm trying to like also implicate the reader, right? This is not like a I'm gonna read this and become more empathetic, and now I know about other people's lives kind of thing, but more of like, oh no, like you're a participant. But never quite to first, right? I think, getting to first, I would have had to do like things that I was just too much of like a punk to do, you know what I mean? Like, I was not like other kids that I know, who I wasn't really willing to kill someone, at least not as a child. There's other complications as an adult in the military, right, as you know. And so I was kind of trying to clip it off there at that attempt, and thinking about what kind of experiences can get you that close to the thing. That's a great question, thank you. I probably said too much about it. Yeah, please.
You mentioned that you kind of utilize that like almost anime version of storytelling that has this really big loop, so something goes back to questioning. And I was wondering if you could talk maybe a little bit about if other, because we were talking a little bit about your research history, if there are other things that in this book in particular you utilize from that like route of the study or in other works that's something considered.
Yeah, I mean, the other like big one is, video games themselves, or like playing video games, and criticism generally, which is a world that I'm like still kind of steeped in now. Like when I came here, I knew I wanted to get a PhD, and so most of the time I was taking like literature courses and stuff here. Like I took one workshop a semester, but I mostly took lit courses and some Spanish stuff. But the video games thing is big because it's experiential. Rather than being like purely linguistic. And I think that's part of what makes video games difficult to write about. And I think that's also part of why they don't get as much attention in the kind of critical sense, even though they're by far the kind of biggest aesthetic products in the world ever, like in all of history, right? So that would be a bigger deal if the like learning curve to get into experience was lower than it is right now for video games. But I think that that's changing a little bit too. But, video games are this thing where, like, you can, it's funny, I remember talking to you about this, Roy, when I was, like, trying to explain. He was like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, video games are this medium where you can kind of, it's all under a certain kind of control, and it's especially true that if you don't make video games, and if you are not, like, a computational genius, you don't always understand that. So you're in an experience that is set up with the possibility of you winning, which is completely untrue about real life, obviously, that is also very, very difficult. They take you just to the edge of impossibility and then allow you to overcome it given enough practice, given enough depth, skill, etc. But they also ask really complicated questions linguistically and socially too, right? So I'm thinking one of the games that's in this book is like Star Ocean, the second story. So big, sweeping JRPG, Japanese role-playing game, over about 120 hours it takes to beat it, think Final Fantasy, etc. Where it's commonplace actually to be put in situations with people of different genders, sexuality, races, to be put in conflict and cooperation with those folks in a way that you have to make decisions about, which I think is very different than the kind of thing that happens when something is on like the New York Times bestsellers list. You read half of it and then everybody like talks to their group about like how they're a better person based on that reading. And I wanted to like maintain that sense, and on top of being also very difficult, right? And sometimes very nasty things do happen in the game, but there's like a narrative drive that can kind of force you to overcome. Video games are also how I learned about language first, because a lot of the games I was playing were not always in English, so I would like sit there with my friends and be like, I don't understand what's happening. We would like piece it together. Same thing with like ripping off anime from like Kazaa, Llama, or whatever. I'm dating myself a little bit. So that was really important to me, that initial active translation, those initial encounters with difference, with narrative, with difficulty, that I think are getting kind of like lost at this point. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So, I really enjoyed reading for my creative writing class. We read Sync, and it's actually really fascinating to hear you talk about it, because you read Sync, and everyone in our class had much to say about it. And some of the things like you ended up specifically talking about, like one of the things was the repetition that you mentioned. Like someone mentioned that in class, but they're like, I don't really know if like I understood this right. And then you mentioned it, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe people should give college kids, more credit. Anyway, like just hearing the way you think and how you wrote your piece is really fascinating to me. And I'm curious, as I read what you wrote, who have you read, like, and who influenced your writing?
That's a great question. One that like should be easy to answer, but it's always more difficult when it comes down to it because you never remember offhand. So I mean, I would say like there's a bunch of video game stuff, a bunch of poetry. I think that's like a cliche now that we always say like, yeah, read more poetry than prose, and like that's how I learned how to write, kind of thing. But I think it's still kind of true, actually. So it's like one of those things that's kind of cliche, but also a little bit true. I was just saying that I was reading Sonia Sanchez's book, Homegirls and Hand Grenades. Again, I was rereading it because I'm teaching poetry for the Book and Institute now. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is fire. Like, I really still love this book, going back to it. But I guess I read pretty widely. I remember reading Black Wave in Roy's class, actually. That's one of the first times I had read a memoir that was in third person and found other ones from that. It was also very humorous, so that part was useful. What is it? The Life of Alice B. Toklas as well was also like memoir-y, but kind of like funny, playing with genre forms, stuff like that. I think of, what's another one that's really big? Simone White's poetry right now is really important, and her criticism as well. She writes a lot about like trap music and black life and gender in ways that I think are like really beautiful. And other, kind of like big narrative stuff. I read Indra Das's book, The Devourers, which I think is like one of the best fantasy books ever written, alongside N.K. Jemisin's book, The Fifth Season, that whole series. I mean, all her writing is good, but I think there's something about that series, and the Hugo Awards agree with me as well, they would say. So I really love those. There's a great deal of stuff. I don't know, I'll probably think of more stuff as we go on, but those are some of the ones that I was thinking that came to mind. And older stuff, right? Like, so for what I'm writing, you can't write what I'm writing if you never read like Black Boy or thought about the role that like Richard Wright has, and a lot of those black folks coming from the Deep South, particularly like Mississippi, many of whom ended up migrating to places like Philadelphia, right? Because Philadelphia in a lot of ways is perceived as safer, and still is a sanctuary city, actually, for a lot of immigrants coming into Philadelphia. So it's books like that. Audre Lorde's book, Zammy, was super important, and a lot of her essays and stuff like that. So it's kind of all over the place, I think. Thank you for that question. Yeah, please.
What can you tell us about the Otis Spunkmeyer project?
Oh, that, yeah. So that is, yeah, it's so funny. I'm supposed to tell my editor something about that today, too, but we'll see how that goes. It is essentially a novel that is trying to think about the relationship between three places that I think are like very, very similar. That is like the military, hospitals under the American healthcare system, and like schooling or places where we get like education or whatever, broadly construed. And the things that we're expected to do with, for, and to other people in those places being a little too similar, I would say. And it's essentially tonally kind of similar, but there's a lot of kind of shifts in perspective is what I'm working through now, or trying to figure out. It's also not exactly linear in the same way, and a lot of the time in the book itself is spent really focused on, right, like Philadelphia, hospital, outside of hospital, and Baghdad, and then coming back around. Thank you. Hey, Belle.
There's so much momentum in so much of your writing and in your speech. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you perceive momentum in your writing, and whether you slow down.
That is a great question, because it's something I think about when I'm reading a lot. And there's a couple things to that. So I think two books that I really like, this is related to a previous question too. Of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Matt Johnson's book Pym, which I think owes a lot to books like Frankenstein, in the way that they're trying to set up how you're supposed to read this thing, and then they just like say whatever they want afterwards, right? There's like this initial preamble, like this is the setup, this is what happened. You know, Matt Johnson, he's like trying to be funny, right? So he's like writing a letter, it's like in the form of a letter written to another person, being like, you're maybe not gonna believe me, but this is exactly what happens. I still think that's one of the funniest books I've written. But to the momentum thing, I think for one, it's the trying to teach the reader how to read a thing in the beginning, and then being able to be more playful later on. So I do go through, the first chapter is the longest chapter. It's the one where I go through great lengths to introduce setting and characters in a way that makes them feel not completely familiar, as in like they're transparent and you know everything about them, but enough that when they come up, that there's a kind of comfort with them later. And then like reading so I talk fast already generally. My grandfather, who was the largest presence in my life, for better and for worse, talked very fast. So I've inherited some of that. And I think pacing, reading pace as well, I learned from people like Daniel Evans, who I think is one of my favorite people to see or to watch read, because she reads so lightning fast, but the prose is formed in a way that it's so deliberate and it's meant to be that way. I used to get a lot of flack about, you're talking too fast, you're writing too fast, whatever. I'm like, no, I'm trying to make it work that way, like it's deliberate, I'm trying to do. And I think that she does that the best of any person that I know. So if anybody's interested in like, or they're being told that they're speaking too fast, or their writing is too quick, or their reading is too quick, you should watch Daniel Evans read and see. It's like a masterclass in pace. In that way. Thank you for the question. Other ones? Oh no, I think Roy, you're watching time, not me. I don't know. All right.
Anytime.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
I enjoyed your reading. I haven't actually read the book myself, but I enjoy it and I plan on reading it in the future. I'm also like an undergrad econ major, so I'm not very informed on like writing and all of that. But I just wanted to kind of hear about your thoughts on like desensitization on violence, especially in like early Latinized America. You talked about video games a lot, which are very violent, and they have been historically.
Yeah.
And kind of like what your thoughts are on like a child going through like the development and like being like so aware of violence, and just like just speak on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like, I like the desensitization to violence questions. I think sometimes we're looking in maybe the wrong place to think about them, because, I mean, you know, it's one of the things to live here or to occupy any kind of space is already to be kind of participating in a whole host of shit that happened especially over the past like 400 years, if you're thinking about in the United States, if you're thinking about like the field or provenance or realm of Black studies, let alone like in a geopolitical sense, right? So it's interesting to me that like in, I think the 90s, right, like Mortal Kombat comes out and there's this like board created to like rate video games badly, but I'm like, all the other shit that went down before Mortal Kombat came out, and you know, like, and it seemed perfectly fine. Like, this is the thing. It seems so weird to me, you know. So sometimes I kind of laugh when people say like, you know, you can't have kids playing Call of Duty or like these other things because it's like too violent. But I'm also like, you know, like we also have been training like people who are interpolated as male to like dominate and rape folks for like, I don't know, thousands of years. We have already instituted a sense where like difference often means murder, like legitimately, right? In so many contexts. And, you know, I don't know, every other day somebody gets shot in a school. It's just like there's so many obvious, even contemporary things, but also in the kind of historical sense, the way that land has been added. So like whenever somebody talks about violence, I'm like, I want to talk about that stuff, or like desensitization to violence, because we have already become really desensitized. The thing for me is like, I have a hard time dealing with the idea that the violent, like talking about it or writing about it is the thing that is like destroying one's like society or whatever. And I'm like, it's already kind of destroyed, man. Like it's, you know, at least from my perspective. And so in that sense, I'm like, we should find better ways of talking about it, but we shouldn't pretend that this is the initial iteration of violence because we have the internet or something like that, right? Because that's just not true. Thank you for this question. I thought that was like a fire alarm or something. Not bad. Yeah, please. Josh.
You're so you're doing a PhD now
Yeah.
in literature,
Mm-hmm.
and you write literature. So, talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, that's kind of frowned upon, right? Like you're not supposed to be.
No, I didn't.
No. I mean, like the thing, if you are in like a literature department or like a theory department or whatever, which most literature departments are, there are cultural studies departments for a whole bunch of like economic and historical reasons. Literature departments are kind of phasing out or they're, you know, kind of getting gone, right? So it's like either rhetoric or English, which is actually cultural studies technically. So it's kind of frowned upon, right? That you, if you spend a bunch of your time writing like quote unquote creative writing, when you're supposed to be studying quote unquote like creative writing,
I
you
was
don't
thinking the other way
call it that.
around. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? I think for people, in a lot of sense, who have tenure at elite institutions, I'm not, you know, talking about anybody here, obviously. But it depends on where you go. Like, they're like, oh, you know, you're spending time on this, like, you're wasting time, I'm sorry, on this cute little, like, writing thing. I mean, like the stuff that you're studying, like, what are you talking about? It's really jarring. So that is to say, individuation and disciplinarity are really seriously like bigger problems maybe than we think, aside from like the separation between the sciences and the humanities. It's also like even within the provenance of like writing and reading said writing or criticism. And this is also true, I think, in MFA programs where, at least when I was doing MFA and the MA, a lot of folks were like, I'm not taking a lit class, or like, I'm not doing criticism or whatever. And I always try to say like, yeah, it's like the same thing. It's not, you know, it's not that different. Or it should be taken formally just as seriously. And I think sometimes we intimidate people who do like creative writing. By we, I mean folks who like have a lot of knowledge about literature. We like push them out of that realm and then wonder why we don't have anybody writing good criticism and like, you know, art book forum and shit like that is closing down, right? Obvious stuff. And we shouldn't, I guess. So to me, I think that they're like the same thing, or you are trying to make a set of mental or like arguments that are about intensities of feeling or thinking that are difficult to make, but I often feel myself getting like forced out of it. I have an advisor who like writes poetry, and she's like, the poetry and the criticism is the same thing. And I'm like, yes, I agree, but that doesn't mean the people who gotta like mark off my dissertation agree. So, I think it's like a little weird and jarring, and I'm trying to figure out how I can conform the least to kind of like formal expectations that I don't think are that useful, while still kind of like getting away with something.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Do you think there are people who are trying to like collapse that distance between creative writing and like critical writing? Like scholars who are writing are trying out innovative ways to produce criticism and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think tons of people. You know, depends on like what attention that we're. So Simone White is a person I think who does not generate any distinction between those two things, which I think is true. There are a lot of folks who like will do I mean, like the joke I made about Roy writes good criticism and quote unquote creative writing or whatever, that is asking similar questions about a field of issues. When I was here, I had organized a panel that was to ask that very question, and so my now friend Rebecca was on that panel. I think, was Nan on that panel? I don't know. I think maybe Nan Ja was on that panel. And so like to think about that very question, and I had to ask Simone, and she was like, no, I can't do that right now. I was like, oh, okay, I respect that. This is like before I came there. But I think it's like very, very kind of commonplace, especially true in like Black studies and feminist studies. People in those arenas are, I think, much more likely to have that as an expectation that like the things that you write are about experience and material conditions, whether that is, something that gets read or viewed as criticism. And you have to like figure out, wiggling your way through that, right? Like, do I have to publish this in social text, or is this going to like eFlux, or is this for like VQR or whatever? And sometimes the venue or your job, right, is the thing that forces you to conform to the thing, but I don't think you have to make like a separation mentally. Yes, please.
Hi, Joseph. My name is Haley Sheets. I'm an English professor at a community college up in Michigan, and myself and some of my other colleagues brought a group of college students here today to listen to you.
Thank you
speak.
for coming.
Yeah, we're excited to be here. Many of the students that we brought today to listen to you speak, my question for you is one that I think some of them are probably wondering, but are maybe a little shy to ask themselves. Many of them are very interested in creative writing and possibly going on to pursue a bachelor's or beyond in creative writing. And I'm wondering, when you think back to your own experiences as an undergraduate student, what are the things that you wish you had either done more of, or on the flip side, less of, in order to help you hone your craft, in terms of what you know now based on all of your experiences combined?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you so much for that. And so that means a lot to me. I mean, if not for a community college in Philly, I would not be anywhere right now. I would definitely be dead. Almost guaranteed, right? So community college is like very close to my heart. And I didn't study, so here's one thing. I didn't study English or creative writing in school at first. I studied like science broadly construed, so I was in like physics and stuff like that when I was at community college. And then I went to do my BA in biology, and then I went to grad school for to be a physician assistant. And then I ultimately like left when I found out you could get paid to write, even if it was only a little bit. So that's like the askew kind of trajectory that happened. And one of the things I think that I wish I would have done earlier was to figure out ways to integrate myself into the kind of world of like literature or writing or whatever, because I was doing the side thing where I'd be like, all right, I need to take, like X amount of, I need to take like physics and like 2 chemistry classes this semester. Be like, the other 2 slots are, African American literature and like creative writing 101 or whatever. And I just kept doing that over and over again all the way through my BA, right? But I never like left. I was like, I need, the science because I need to make money. And I wish I would have tried to integrate myself into that world outside of the classroom, because I didn't really attempt to do that until I was like much older. By that I mean, reading journals and not just, like reading journals where people who were in the same position as me were getting published or working on or applying to like workshops or going to the reading events, for example. I mean, y'all are already a step above me because I wasn't going to the reading events, et cetera, and figuring out what it took to do that kind of work. Because I was like blind to it. I spent so much time working in healthcare, and I was like, I've mastered this world, I know how it functions, I can do this with my eyes closed, I'm comfortable here. And then I spent all these other years doing that same thing with like the world of literature, applying to the workshops, going to all the readings, asking all the questions that sometimes felt really goofy and made me feel uncomfortable and sometimes embarrassed, but eventually like you get over it and you feel better about it. So I wish I would have done that, because that is, I think, more important than like taking the class or whatever, and being quiet in said class or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we probably have time for one more question, and then maybe hang out a little bit, buy some books.
You don't have to buy the book; it's no pressure. But if you do, I will sign it.
You'll sign it.
Yes.
What's the most important piece of advice you would give to somebody writing a memoir?
That's writing a memoir? That's a great question. To have actual real life, day-to-day conversations with the people that you're writing about. Because I think that's one of the weird things I think people do. It's like, I can only write this when they're dead, or I'm going to like not speak to the people, which sometimes results in this thing, putting the oneself on the page above everybody else. And it also is like not a version of doing the work, right? It's like a very strange thing to do, I think, to write something about somebody that you would never say to their face. It's a little too cowardly. Even I'm not like that cowardly. So I would say to do that, right? To like never even bother writing about a person or situation that you are not willing to like reinterrogate or to integrate yourself into again. Even if it's like bad or whatever, or like hurts or something. I don't think you can, for me, I'm like, in order to write something that I like respect, that has to happen. It has to be necessary. Thank you for that question.
thank you, Joseph, for.
Thank you.